Some of you might be like, sweet, ha 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 ha, I'm going to get homework done. Pause. Where could someone get confused when reading the problems of calculator worksheet number 1? I'm not saying they would, but where could they? Some of you are very good at your calculators, I know. Viewing window, okay? That could be a little weird, especially if you've never seen a calculator before. Not seen, I apologize. Used a TI 8384, any of the different variations calculator before. Viewing window, what's it talking about? Right, so a normal, well, do you guys actually know what zoom that is called? There's a whole menu called the zoom standard, good. So in your calculator, the normal zoom, or I should say, the standard zoom is going to be a 10 by 10 window is what I call it, but Jordan's right, negative 10 to 10, negative 10 to 10. That's going to be the normal window. When might you need to go outside of that? Yeah, it depends on the line, first of all. So if it's a linear function, a bigger angle, or if you have like a parabola that's been shifted up 20, are you going to see it if you do a 10 by? No, it's not even going to be there. You're like, oh, nothing. Just kidding. Think. Your zoom is off. So one huge place that we can, I don't know, get into all sorts of trouble is if our zoom is off. And one of those ways that the zoom can be off is if we have one of these funky things turned on, like a plot 1 or a plot 2 or a plot 3. If any of you guys have ever gotten one of these error messages, maybe you haven't, which is great, but someday maybe you will. You're like, the function's in there. I hit the graph button. It's supposed to work. And this is the worst kind of error message too, because what are the options that you have? Quit. Like some of you doing homework. Quit, right? And you're like, great, well, what's wrong? I have no idea. So if you made that difficulty, that's something that's in the handbook as a possible error that can happen. So this handbook isn't just for teaching you how to use the calculator, but it's also what can go wrong. Does that make sense? So we're doing two different things as we go through this handbook. Here's another type of error, just like a quick introduction before we even go into it, because the errors are usually the weirdest parts. What if I was, oh, it didn't get rid of the plot. Lo siento, hold on. You guys are going to see the mistake that I make. Some of you, one of the most common mistakes to do if you're just first learning how to use the calculator, which maybe a couple of our classmates are, is to put a minus 2x instead of a negative 2x. Two very different buttons. But what's better about this error? Yeah, we don't just have a quit option, we also have a go to option. So we can go ahead and hit number 2, the go to. And where did it go to? Ding, 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 something's wrong. Does that make sense? So sometimes errors actually like to show us what's wrong, and that's really nice. Sometimes we're just supposed to know what the message means, and then it gets tricky, so we're going to go looking for like troubleshooting what's gone wrong, but then everything's nice and neat. Has anybody figured out why I have negative 2x plus 5 in my calculator right now? Has something to do with what you just got a second ago, the two different handouts. If it's not the one, check out the other. Yeah, where'd you find it? Okay, in the handbook there are objectives. There are little like check mark benchmarks along the way that I'm going to want you guys to do. So there are really 3 things that are 3 actual like turn in credit point things that are going to be required before the quiz on Monday. One of them is this handbook with each of the objectives done. Another one is calculator worksheet number 1, which you already have, and the last one is calculator worksheet number 2, which you don't have, and believe me, you don't want yet. It's a lot harder than number 1. Okay, so those 3 things. If you guys notice, in your graphing calculator handbook, which I have, I apologize, in my notes, here we go. All right, before you ever get to an objective in the calculator handbook, what comes before? What is all this stuff? First of all, what's the big category? Yeah. So the whole, I think it's the first 2 pages. You guys can kind of look ahead. I think the first 2 pages are specifically talking about the graphs. Then it goes into tables, but it's actually still talking about a function in this y equals button. So for the first, I think it's like 5 pages, maybe even more. It's talking about what do we do if we put a function in this y equals menu? What are all the things we can do? Okay? We're going to be dealing with zooms, we're going to be dealing with windows, we're going to be dealing with graphs and different characteristics of graphs, we're going to be dealing with tables and trying to analyze like X's and Y's and all sorts of stuff. Bless you, bless you. But before you ever get to an objective, there's some information that might be helpful, and why am I telling you this? At the beginning of the handbook, if you guys just saw this and I said, hey, you're supposed to fill this out, I think most of you could do it real fast, right? Your question might be, well, how do I show you I did it? Like it's in your calculator, right? Well, what do you think I want to prove that you got it? Quick little sketch. Yeah. You don't need to put lots of points and like make a table and do all this plugging in. Just a quick little sketch. You guys can see my calculator already has it. Hopefully you know how to make your calculator with it. It has a y-intercept of what? 5 and an x-intercept of 2.5. But go ahead and pause, fill it in. Right next to the box. There's not really space underneath. Sometimes there is. I know it's kind of imprecise, but this is a handbook. I didn't really want you guys doing a separate homework assignment on separate paper. So go ahead and make a little sketch next to number 1. If you're feeling guilty because you're like, I didn't actually do it, then pause, put it in your calculator, get it, and then sketch it, and that's great. Because that's ultimately what I need you to be able to do. But especially the that just got your calculator for this class, you might be like, I don't know how to graph that with the calculator. I know how to do it by hand, but I don't know how to do it with the calculator. Well, the point was really to kind of skim the information first. And the information tells you, hey, there's this thing called a y equals button. There's this thing called a variable button, which is weird because it has an x, a t, a theta, and an n. But guess what? It works as an x whenever it's in, well, it's getting a little deep now, but whenever it's in what we call function mode. So even though it has lots of different things on it, it will work as the x here. The one thing it doesn't actually talk about, I think, is the negative sign. So that might have been something you had to look for a little bit on your own. But for almost every objective in the handbook, the information right above tells you exactly how to do it. Does that make sense? And once again, why am I making a big deal if most of you could do this super easily? Because the whole isn't as easy as the first. Does that make sense? We get into regressions, we get into maximums and minimums, which some of you are still fuzzy on, even if you did them last year. We get into running different regressions, like linear, quadratic, cubic, getting into our stats tables, not as easy as just, hey, let's graph. And if you are just getting used to jumping from one objective to, let's see, where's there another box? Yay, let's do that one. Let's get to another box. Yay, where's that one? Eventually you might get to something you don't know how to do, and what should you do then? Quit? Go to, hey, calculator lingo, go to the stuff right above. And then check out what buttons are there, check out what features they're talking about. Oh, hey, common error. Might have been nicer at the very first objective, but check out the buttons right above and the information right above. It's going to help you out. I'm going to go ahead and pause for just a second to see how quickly some of you guys are able to work through. Some of you are just going to be busting these out, and it's going to be super easy. Let me give you 5 minutes. You're in your handbook. Stay in your handbook. And I want you guys to try to meet as many objectives, aka follow as many directions as possible. But if you don't know how to do it, don't quit. Check out the directions right above. Does that make sense? Okay, ready, set, and go. being about that y equals button is because the point is, can you get a function into this y equals, and can you figure out things to do with it? One of the big menus that you guys are going to need for graphing calculator worksheet number 1, the one that's due for homework tomorrow, is how to use this menu, which is the second trace menu, which hopefully all of you went to last year at some point if you used the calculator before in Algebra 2. Now, for sure, you don't know how to do number 6 and 7 because that doesn't show up until calculus. So there are going to be things even after this year. Well, actually, we're going to use both of those at the end of the year. But there are definitely things that you shouldn't know yet. That's okay. But there are features that are a little bit tricky at multiple points, value, 0, minimum, maximum, intersect. One of the honors pre-cal kids from last year, who was in Mr. Che's class the year before, we graded, because they did this one last night, we graded their worksheet really quickly just to see how the answers matched up, and poor kid was like, every single one of mine is wrong. There was one that was doing wrong, and it messed up all of his answers by decimal points, which might seem inconsequential, but they're kind of important, especially if you're trying to get the right answer. Because if you get 5 and my answer was 5.36, or if you get 5.214 and my answer was I forget what I said, 3 something 6, then your answer is wrong. So you need to be precise on these. But in order to be precise, you have to learn how to use these functions. Here's what I want you guys to do right now. I want you to time out on the Pre-Cal Graphing Calculator Handbook. Tonight, I want you to be able to get the objectives 1 through 10 done. I want you to get objectives 1 through 10 done. And if you haven't learned the calculator before, you might want to do objectives 1 through 10 before you even try the worksheet. But for those of you that have worked on the calculator before, you might be like, I'm not sure I actually need to do the objectives first. So here's what I want you to do. I want person in the front of the groups to turn to people in the back, and I want you guys to work through worksheet number 1, get as far as you can, matching up answers with each other. Let's try to figure out if any of you guys are going to do these functions a little bit off now. That way you don't have to be the person tomorrow saying, why is every single one of my answers a little bit off? You're going to be able to collaborate with your group. So let's see if you can get your homework done for tonight. Good? And if you guys, as a group, have any questions people can't answer, then I'll try to help you guys out. Hold on, pause. People in the front, literally turn desks. It's awkward for you to write, and it's awkward for the people behind you to try to collaborate if your back is to them. So, cool, cool, cool. All right. Trying to get as far as you can, calculator worksheet number 1. Yeah. Yeah.
Is a number including that or a specific number?
I mean, if you're...
Because in the little window it said to put all of these numbers, but I had no idea what this was.
Well, in this one, since the y min, y max, delta x, I would just have it go by 1. Actually, never go down to that one. Do you want that one to be 84?
No.
That's what I was wondering how that happened. There we go. He's a little bit happier. Yeah, just keep it as 1. That's good. There you go. Matthew, desk. Just a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just so that your back's not to them and you guys are available. And if you guys get stuck, remember I just showed you a menu that I said would be very, very helpful. So maybe if you are looking at like that directive of a 0, because remember I said some of the words might get confusing. If you look up here and say, oh, there's a 0 feature, that might give you a hint. Oh, when they say 0, 0 feature, that's what they're asking for. Trying to use your grapher. No, how's it going, bud? Are you a TA for them up there?
Yep.
Nice, that's a good thing to be. Beginning of the school year going well?
Yeah,
Good.
definitely.
Good. See you around, bud. Mrs. Kendrick stealing my kids. She didn't say what period she wanted you on. Yeah. You can go now, I suppose, if you want. She didn't say if she wanted you now or later, but it's probably about your schedule. That way you can figure out. Do you know where you're going? Yeah, right up in the library. Where are you guys on? Well, see, in this window, you can't really see the line so well. Like, So then you're trying to do an appropriate window, like one where you can see, ideally, like the intercept, like where it crosses both axes. So what I would do is I would maybe either try to do, what'd you already do? You could zoom out, or you could play around. That's a little bit better. But see, imagine this, if we were to, see how it's squished? Like that part squished? This is not bad, it's not horrible. But I would actually come in and be like, you know what, I have way too many Y's. So part of this might just be being like, you know what, that's way too intense. Maybe I'll do something like -50 to 50. I'll clear it though. Okay, it's upside down. And then you might have a much nicer picture and like, oh, that's pretty good. But it's no one right answer per se. But once you have the graph, now go to A and B and then do the following. So what's the value when x is -17? Remember how I said we're checking out this menu? Match the words. So there's a value in, there's a value. See it? So they're teaching you what to do. There you go. Yeah. And an appropriate window is one that the 17 shows up. Inappropriate, the 17 wouldn't work. Yeah. Yeah. Keep looking up at the board. I have that menu. It's a really good one. Yeah. Okay, every time that they ask you with a question mark, they're telling you to put your cursor somewhere and hit enter. Now, what you're trying to answer is left bound. Are you doing intersection? What are you doing right now?
It says use directions below to find a value of zeros, minimums, maximums.
Okay, so right now you are in, I apologize, what button are you in? Are you in max, min, or zero?
I'm 0.
Okay, perfect. So zeros are the intersections with the x-axis. So you want to go, to the left, but make it super obvious. There are kids that it's just way safer. That's going to be to the left of that 0, and then go to the right of that 0. Nope, not even that right. See what I mean? You're just making a little window for it to look in. Then hit enter, and it'll locate in between. Is anybody's calculator being weird? Oh. You want to make this just the x variable? That way it can be a lot of different values, not just the single one. Because the 0 of the line is when it intersects the axis. And so you wanted this line. Now you're going to have to change your window and zoom out. But now that you have it so that it's all the different x values, now you can use that really cool 0 feature to help you out. Is that cool?
For the one where it says that x is -17, though, do I plug this?
That one, you could have used check out the terminology. Yeah. So you didn't have to actually plug it in by hand. You could just use the feature. Yeah, I'm coming around this. You're ultimately algebraically plugging in, but on the calculator you have this second trace value feature that allows you to plug in. And it's going to work as long as your window shows it. So you're answering with the y equals.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the 0, what is it?
Check it. And what the 0 is talking about is the x-intercept. So it's asking you questions like left bound, right bound. Whenever it has that question mark, you want to put your cursor in the right place. So the left of that and somewhere to that. Does that make sense? So there's good. Just to be safe, you can hit enter. And you're just kind of making a boundary and saying, you know what, I'm just giving you, make sure you go past it.
and then trace.
You didn't have to do those two. You could have gotten closer. Just make sure that you have the 0 in between. And then the guess just says, hey, go find it for me. Got it. The x value, yeah. Yeah.
My calculator just froze. It's something.
Oh, stink.
You just turn it off? And it'll work?
Yeah, I tried it off. Just think like a computer, if you have to restart it, that's kind of what I was
The
doing.
one intersection, is it the intersection function just can't calculate one of it at a time?
One at a time. And that's why it has the left, right, because then you can go find any intersection that you want. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's okay.
Because I plugged, when trying not to make it like this, and just plug this.
You can. But the ideal was that you tried it, and then you're like, oh, I think it looks like it, and then you compare your window to theirs. Does that make sense? Because if you had done zoom out, zoom in, and I tried to figure it out, it probably would have had weird decimals, and then it's like, oh, I got close to. So it was kind of like an exploratory, but showing you the answer at the end. That's okay. I know. Yeah. Do I have a tissue? Wait, I might have some back here. Unless all the kids used them last year. There were APs. They did cry a little bit. Yeah, why don't you grab the box from the office? Yeah, Joe. Right. So keep the X. And it's not gonna, but you're gonna have to make your window. Got it. It's that feature, but what it's talking about is the x-intercept when y is 0. Yeah, it'd be harder though. Right, and so to get the actual feature, you're going to want to use. But pause, do you see how on your graph you can't see where it hits? You're going to need to zoom out to get over that way. Well, you're going to need to see it. I know, I wish that if you kept going it would go that way, but it doesn't. So then zoom out. Now you see it. Now go to second trace. And then it's going to ask you questions. Guys, real quick, just for the questions, because all of these are going to ask you little question marks, just in case you don't know. If you do, keep going. If you don't, tonight, go through the handbook step by step. It'll remind you how to use these features. But real quick, for instance, the 0 one. And I'm not doing the same line, so don't use my answer. When it says any question mark, left bound question mark, it wants you to put the cursor in that position of, well, I'm trying to find a 0. That's going to be the x-intercept when y equals 0. All it's saying is put the cursor somewhere to the left of, I could stop there, I could stop there, I could stop there. If I get too close, I might pass it and mess everything up. Enter answers the question. New question. Right. Some of you guys, it like puts a cool line to show you. I'm obviously to the right of the 0. And then when it says guess, giving it a good fun, whatever you guess might be a little bit wrong anyway, just hit enter and it'll go get it for you. So when there are those little question marks, it's asking you to put the cursor either a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, hitting one function, hitting another for the intersection points. It's asking you to put the cursor on the different locations. That way it knows where to look. Does that make sense, kind of? Okay. Yeah. Not, yeah, I think you are. Yeah, so then find your cursor first of all. Check it, your y is in. So just keep going. See. There we go. Yeah, that's one of them. Enter and save. I can do it.
But it says there's two, so is that the intersection of the left side?
Right. Then you have to, got it. Yeah. Let me see. Oh, you have something weird turned on. Hold on. Not you personally, just your calculator does. Better. Now you can go ahead and it'll automatically select them when you type them. There you go. Yeah. Okay. First curve is a question. See how it's just on the one line? First curve just means like tell me one of them. And you're like, yeah, that's the blue one. Tell me the other one. Yeah, it's the red one. Because you could have 3 or 4 or 5. So it needs you to tell you which two. Now that you've told it which two, the guess says go tell me about where. I'll find it exactly for you. All right, if you got a little bit stuck, go to your handbook before you try to finish the worksheet tonight. Does that make sense? Objectives 1 through 10, worksheet number 1. I'll be here after school. If anything weird's with your calculator, come ask me. Bye, guys. Just make sure your desks are straight before you leave.